Okay, I guess good morning, everyone, and welcome to the morning session on day 4 of the CP of New York State Annual Conference. Let's see. Sorry about that. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors, our corporate partners for their significant generosity during a challenging 2020 year for the field of IDD. The CP of New York State office and our 24 statewide affiliates are most appreciative for all that you do to support direct service providers and those with complex disabilities. A great thank you to the Beacon Group and Focused Wealth Management. We'd also like to thank the Evero Corporation for their continued support of CP of New York State by making our Zoom platform for the 2020 virtual conference possible. Please contact the CP of New York State offices for more information should you wish regarding any of our sponsors. Today, I'm joined by Bill DeVoe of CP of New York State, and we're excited to have our panelists, Senator David Carlucci, Evan Sullivan, and Tom Mira with us for this morning session's 2020, the Year of Advocacy in Review. Advocacy is the cornerstone of seeking the best possible outcome and life for individuals we support, their families, and our staff. And this year has provided a unique set of challenges to the IDD field. We're excited to discuss current and future trends in advocacy and the various projects and partnerships that CP of New York State is a part of. As a reminder to our session participants, if you'd like to engage with our panelists, kindly put your questions in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen, and the moderator will provide your questions to the panel throughout the session. Attendees will be muted during this session. Again, welcome to everyone. This is CP of New York State Advocacy 2020, the year of the pivot. It felt like all we did was pivot this year. In the fall of 2019, last fall, all of the IDD providers and actually all nonprofits recognized that we needed to move towards a new advocacy campaign because of years with underfunding. And NIDA, New York Disability Advocates, which is all of the IDD provider associations, formed as NIDA, New York Disability Advocates, and we hired Ostroff and Evan Sullivan from Ostroff, and then Kivett is a PR firm with Tom Mira. And we all joined, NIDA joined all human services, nonprofits, and we all joined together on what we at the time was a great 3 for 5 advocacy campaign, if you remember. 3% increases or 3% trends or growth over the next 5 years. And then we started in the beginning of January with a $6 billion shortfall in the New York State budget. But we were still making CP, NIDA, and nonprofit partners were making headway with our 3 for 5 advocacy message on the system's finances in January and February. We had a successful lobby day in the end of February, and COVID was just beginning to be an issue. We met with the governor's office, Assembly, Senate, and everyone was very receptive to our messaging and ensuring stability in the field. But then the beginning of March, our world changed. And on March 7th, the governor declared a state of emergency because of COVID. COVID particularly hit downstate, New York City, Long Island, Rockland, and Westchester. They were the hardest hit. And clearly OPWDD and DOH were ill prepared. CP advocacy was at the state as well as the federal level. And in conjunction with NIDA and Evan and Tom Mira, we were able to get our field recognized as essential workers. We helped accessing PPE, developed hospital discharge planning policy, ensuring those the rights of those with complex health needs. We collected real-time data. NIDA has a data on residential infections, and we assisted everyone with PPP, CARES Act funding. We worked with NIDA affiliates on advocacy and PR messaging about the impact of COVID.
Thanks for that recap, Barbara. So obviously we have a wealth of experience on our panel today, and we have a unique experience situation where we have both sides of the desk of the lobbying efforts with Senator David Carlucci and Evan from Ostrov. So what we would like to look into, Senator Carlucci, is how has this past year changed successful advocacy? What have you found to be successful in engaging?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be here and to see everyone virtually and to talk about this extremely important part of advocacy. And I think that at the end of the day, really, the fundamentals haven't really changed. It's still, you have to have a vision, you have to have a plan. I like to say you can't give away anything that you don't have. And if you don't have a plan, if you don't have an exact ask, then you really don't have much to offer when you're talking to decision makers. And that's why I think ultimately, first it's about identifying what it is that you want to accomplish and being crystal clear about that. You mentioned the 3 for 5 campaign. I remember when we started with the Be Fair to Direct Care campaign, that there was a big problem in the beginning, was that it's easy to say, oh, okay, I support Be Fair to Direct Care. That makes sense. But you would leave a meeting without an actual ask. There was no legislation to sign on as a co-sponsor. There was not a physical or an actual amount in terms of what you were asking for in the budget. And so I think those are learning experiences to say, hey, we have an amazing opportunity. We have 100,000 individuals across the state. We have tens of thousands of employees. We really have to mobilize them to develop relationships with their lawmakers. And I think that can be as easy as setting up a Zoom call, or when things get better that you go and meet with your representative. But I think the real value is identifying that you're a constituent, you live in the district, and you really start to educate the lawmaker on your problems and also have something that they can do. So of course, it's always good just to build relationships and say hello and introduce yourself. But I think also you want to equip the people that are going to meet their lawmakers with that actual ask. I think that's just so key and so important. And I find that, you know, up in Albany, you meet with lobbyists, special interest groups, but what really I think makes the difference to lawmakers is meeting with their constituents. And they want to meet their constituents. And so organizing that so that you have teams of people that are keeping their lawmakers accountable, I think is extremely, extremely important.
Great. And that's just something that people need to do all year long, not just on lobby day or when the budget comes out.
Right, that's exactly right. It's got to be like anything. When you have a relationship with someone, if you don't talk to them in a year, you know, that relationship grows cold, right?
Right.
And what I've noticed, and I'm sure, you know, anybody that's been involved in policy making knows, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And what I found is, for being on the committee for a decade and serving as the chair about a half a decade ago, and now again, is that you meet with so many people that, you know, they live this every day, and they have very difficult situations. And I think it's our job really to help them express and articulate the problems that they're having so that it is understandable to lawmakers that don't experience this, don't know the vocabulary,
right?
Don't know the problems. And that's a piece of it. So what I found was there's you go and you advocate and you lobby, but you're just talking about all the problems. That's important to do, but we have to follow that up with, okay, what do we want? Where can we go? And we can't expect the lawmaker to give that to us. We have to provide that to them.
Great. And Senator Carlucci, I know that when you have always been a wonderful champion for people with developmental disabilities. I remember you were first elected, and at the budget hearing, that you were the only one who spoke up. There was in the subcommittee meeting of Senate and Assembly members on the Mental Hygiene Committee, I remember that you were the only one who spoke up in championing particularly the workers and the direct care workers. And this was before our Be Fair to Direct Care campaign or anything. So how clearly this has been a passion for you. How do we also get other legislators to sort of feel that same kind of passion or interest and commitment to our field and to individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, it's a great point, and one that I was very fortunate that I was surrounded by many people that were advocates for IDD. And so I was very fortunate in that regard. So, but I think that basically what we need to do is strategically touch each lawmaker. And, that saying, by the yard, it's hard, by an inch, it's a cinch, that if you have some key people, I really think in each legislative district that are responsible for maintaining those relationships, that is so valuable. That is valuable. And you have those all-stars already sprinkled across the state. But I think what would be great is to have the basic training of these regular people, that are they have no experience with how government works. They're living their lives, taking care of their families. They want to share their story. They want lawmakers to listen. And I think we have to really teach them how to do that, because it's complicated. I find it that in talking to other lawmakers, you start talking about DISCO and DISRIP and ABLE, and they have no idea. And it gets confusing. It's like 1, 2, 3, too many things. But that's where the focus is important, but keep continuing. I think, each lawmaker has constituencies that they know they're going to have to be accountable to, right? They're going to have to, after the budget, after a vote, they're going to have to explain themselves. And I'd really love to see that level of accountability for our lawmakers, and not in a threatening way, but in a relationship way, that these issues cannot be ignored. That just like funding for our school districts, issues that you're just going to have to respond to, we need to make that part of the experience for lawmakers. And I think it's relatively easy to do. I mean, it's an easy process, but it will take a lot of work and coordination, but it's definitely possible. You have the resources in terms of people, you have that people power, and then coordinating it and having it in a strategic approach is going to be so key. That if you have few people that are just meeting with their lawmaker, 2 or 3 times a year, that makes a huge difference. And that they know, hey, in November or in December, we're going to have our meeting with this group, right? Or, that's going to be coming. And you sprinkle that out throughout the year, and that becomes extremely effective. Not just one time, everyone clamoring, before the budget is due, or before a session wraps up. That's when it's very hard to get through. Everyone's running around hectically,
right?
And we want to do our work ahead of time, right? We're still gonna have to push and be frantic before the budget and before the end of session, but we want to have had those meetings and those conversations well before it comes close to crunch time.
Senator, we have a question from the chat. What role do PACs and PAC donations play in effective advocacy?
Yeah, I think that is one form of advocacy, but it's becoming less and less potent. That in a time where running for office, it's almost, it can become taboo to take like political action committee money. Um, what's really valuable, I find, is that one-on-one with the actual constituent, with the actual voter. That is, you can't really buy that. Of course, money will always play a role in running campaigns and running an effective operation. But you're spending that money to get in front of the people that can elect you. So if you can just have a relationship with them, instead of people spending, ridiculous amounts of money to try to, it's kind of funny, right? It's like we seek the lawmaker, and then come election time, the lawmaker is doing everything desperately to seek you. And it's like, how do you fix that relationship? So it's not this, you got to cut through, and then, the senator or the lawmaker is trying to tell you how great they are. It's if you can have those conversations, and that's why I think it's, if you're in Albany and you're dealing with so many different issues, and then you have people from, let's say I represent Rockland County, and people from Niagara Falls are coming to talk to me. It's interesting, and I want to talk to them, but there's so many other things to talk about. I'm definitely going to make it a higher priority to speak to people from my district. And then if you do it right in the district office, it becomes easier for the residents. They don't have to travel up to Albany. And it becomes easier for the lawmaker too, to really spend the time and not be, okay, 15 minutes, let's move on. We got all these meetings. That's really important. And I think also that in any relationship, right, that if you're meeting with someone and they have taken a little bit of time to know about what you're doing and the community you represent, that goes a long way as well. That, everyone has their priority, everyone has their issue. And if someone is, has no idea, oh, you even represent that area? Oh, I was just here with this list of things that I'm supposed to talk to people about. You see that over and over again. And that's like the manufactured advocacy that is not too effective. But if you have a real person, like, hey, and every lawmaker has this, it's like, that's that advocate, they're coming to see you. Okay, we're going to make time to go see them because we know they're a resident, we know that they're vocal, and they're going to hold us accountable.
So I want to put Evan on the spot and ask him the same question about the role of PACs and PAC donations, and get his take from that.
I think the senator said it perfect. I mean, I think that there's a place for it, and there's a place where it's important, and where it actually allows for the ability, it gives you the ability to have additional conversations with legislators in a less formal setting. Obviously, as the senator knows, I mean, there's 40, he could have 40 meetings in a day in Albany where it's back to back, and then there's oftentimes you have the fundraising circuit prior to COVID up in Albany where you're able to kind of go and have a less formal conversation. But again, I think one of the things that I think is important too is actually having a well thought out political strategy, but that could include things like endorsements or a scorecard. I remember back when I worked for the Senate, we really focused on having one staff person who was responsible for cracking the League of Conservation scorecard the one year. So that, because the members were all so concerned about getting, 100s on that. And it's something that people care about and they see, and it leads to endorsements, but it also is a way to involve the community and hearing from members and hearing, where their positions are on important issues and seeing how what they're saying to individual, constituents and to, groups, how it actually stacks up with what they're voting on and how they're conducting themselves when they're in office. So I think it's both sides of it, right? I mean, unfortunately, I think the political side of it will always be there. I mean, especially when you're in a tough campaign and you have a tough race, and where those individuals or those elected officials are real strong advocates, you want to be able to protect them and help support them to make sure that they're going to continue to be there so that they can continue to fight for your interests up in Albany. So, it's a double-edged sword, but I don't think you need to have a you don't need to, there's a happy medium. You don't have to have, a $10 million PAC to be able to spend crazy amounts of money and do independent expenditures and mailers. But, there's a way to do it to make sure that you have enough resources to be able to support the members that you want to continue to have there to fight for your interests.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a balance, like anything. Would it be better to have a lot of money at your disposal? Absolutely. But it's really not a substitute for the types of things that I was talking about in terms of really building that relationship. I think Evan hit the nail on the head in terms of, okay, now you have a political action committee, you have money that you've raised, and you have lawmakers that support your cause. You're going to want to support them and do what you can to help them in that campaign. But I think that in an organization like what has been put together with Cerebral Palsy Association or all the IDD groups coming together, that you have that, what a lot of groups don't have. You have so many people and so many families that are impacted, that are real people. That's where the real power is. That if you can activate that in a more potent and strategic way, that will outdo the money that is spent in the politics. That, it's like, if you don't have that people power approach, you're going to need a lot of money to try to break through. But what you guys have is that the families and the individuals that is just so powerful.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Albany and coming to Albany and clearly, meeting with legislators in the district through the year. I think you mentioned 3 times, or, keeping up that relationship. I was wondering what you thought about the people coming to Albany for an Albany Lobby Day. Does that mean more to a legislator that someone has traveled from the district to try and come to Albany to meet with them, even though, your days are so packed and you may not be able to actually meet with individuals for very long? Is that a piece of in the advocacy toolkit that you think is important?
I think it's a piece. I think you have to take advantage of all the opportunities. I think it is a piece, but you can't just do that, right? You can't just do the Albany Day. That definitely should be a piece, and every advocacy group should have an Albany Day and have, special resolutions that are passed on the floor that are just symbolic, but build awareness and attention to the cause. I think that, coupled with the, hey, I came up to see you, I want to see what's going on. It's fun to be up here and learn about this. But it's followed up with the local meeting. Also, what I think part of that Albany Day, to the best extent that you can, to have the people that are coming meet with their actual representatives. I think when you have people going, they have that sheet and they say, oh, hit all these lawmakers. And really the worst is when you have these people, you send them through the LOB and the Capitol, and they have no idea like who these lawmakers are. They don't know what part of the state they're from. You go around and they'll introduce themselves and they won't even say where they're from. And you're like, come on. Let's just have, because the lawmaker wants to know that. They're not just there to, oh, okay, you're just a random person that came in here. Like, who are you? Where are you from? What's the deal here? I think, and the people that have been around for a while, they'll even recognize a lot of their constituents. You go into a room and you're like, okay, our people aren't here, especially on issues of this importance. But that's something that's been one of my learning things, that I'm like, oh, this is just kind of a waste of time, because the organization didn't think enough to think, hey, send me people that it's going to be important that I have a relationship with them. Because yes, it's always interesting to hear these stories. Now, if there's a real particular case and a situation that, you want to tell that story and it happened in Western New York and you want lawmakers to know about it, okay, that makes sense. But then I would have people from the district with that person. Because yes, the personal story, put a face on it, that is so compelling. And that's another part that I just wanted to get to, about how these issues are so complicated and complex. And unless you've lived it, unless you're a parent, you don't know the struggles, and you don't know what these things even mean, what these terms mean. And that's where wherever you can put a face, on these issues, and really in a way, I hate to say the word, but dumb it down for lawmakers. I think that's extremely important, that, hey, this is the problem. This is the scenario. This is what happened to Betty. The family, they fell through the cracks. This is why, and this is what we need to do. And it's bill number X, or it's this line in the budget that you need to watch for. And you even need to help us to send a letter to the governor before he prepares his executive budget to include X amount of dollars for this, so that these people like Betty don't fall through the cracks again.
Yeah, I would actually agree with the senator on that too. I think there's, I think even from the time that when I started working for Senator Carlucci, there was every year you got more and more groups coming up and doing large lobby days, and it got to the point where I remember one year, I think my first year in Albany, we were booked 4 meetings wide the entire day, and it was trying to figure out who was doing what meetings and where and why and how did things get scheduled. And ultimately you have groups coming in and not knowing what they're asking for. They don't know the members. And I think one of the things that I think is even more effective, and actually it's been, I think, COVID has actually helped this, is been able to be more targeted in terms of how you do a lobby day or advocacy. I think rather than having people sign up in mass and then trying to fit them into meetings where they might fit, it's being more targeted, knowing who you want to meet with first, and then bringing the individuals and getting individuals from their districts that can help articulate the story in a better way. Because it's great to show a huge number of individuals, but I think that more targeted, and then being able to bring large groups together, that we can never do that again, but bringing large groups together for rallies and press conferences, that's the way to really focus on that. But again, I completely agree with the senator. I think being able to do meetings in the district with constituents is really a much more impactful way to advocate for different issues. And even when you do meetings and you're going in just to kind of give an update, do a tour, talk to the member, and just explain this is what's going on, and not necessarily having a specific ask, but making sure you're keeping that conversation alive too. Because I think if you're just coming in to make an ask, it gets a little tough as well.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to mention about in the district, my office, and I know the majority of senators do the same thing. They have a lot of community events, and it's nice that, we have regulars that come to the events, and it's a nice thing to see. And if you can participate, whether it's a town hall or like a coffee on the corner, that if you're having local people participate in those, that's great as well. If you can send them to those events, they'll really appreciate that. And then I guess too, on the fundraising side, a lot of the lawmakers do have local fundraisers, usually not high dollar. That's where, spending, if you're going to spend money on political donations, I think that's valuable, to build that sense of community, and that the lawmaker is seeing the faces of these individuals, that is valuable as well.
So we have a question in the chat that I think ties together sort of education of legislators, dumbing the issues down, but will also lead, I think, into the storytelling that you alluded to, and hopefully allow Tom Mera to talk, he's been very, very, very patient. So the question is there a process beyond legislative hearings by which elected officials who sit on various health committees to become acquainted with the issues and needs affecting IDD communities? Is there any train up or anything beyond just sort of knowledge absorption?
So if I could take a stab at that first, I mean, I think actually Senator Carlucci did very good at this as chair. And even back when I was committee director back in 2013, 2014, The one thing that I really think made a huge difference in what the senator really tried to do was to have members get briefed by the different agencies and have members become more involved to understand the issues early on in the process before having, actual committee meetings, because there is no formalized process. Members get thrown onto committees, and it's up to them to do as much or as little learning about the issues that they want to do. And to the extent that members are actually being, just voting on bills and staff are making those recommendations or really trying to understand it is really, committee by committee. The other process that does exist is there's a subcommittee process as part of the budget process. And that there's members that are put onto the health, mental hygiene, those subcommittees where they're briefed by staff and at a much higher level than I think you see publicly on, issues related to the budget. But there's still the lack of that foundational briefing. So one of the things that I think has been helpful, and other committees have done this, is they'll bring in, different groups and different experts in fields to brief members on their issues ahead of time prior to committee meetings and early. It could be out of session, and now, obviously everything being virtual, that makes it a lot easier to get members all in one place and on, a Zoom or, a webinar to really walk through the different issues so that they learn it quickly. So there is some processes, but nothing formal.
And the only other thing I would add to what Evan went through is there's also the press. The press is a vehicle where you can educate stakeholders, elected officials, decision makers, et cetera, about the issues facing a specific sector and a specific industry. And I see one of the questions in the chat is, what's the most effective or impactful type of press? And I'll kind of answer this in two steps. I think it's impactful to have a large scale or big media outlet report on your issue. And I think NIDA was actually really successful at that, from the Daily News to the New York Times, et cetera. They covered the issues that we were pursuing at a variety of different times throughout the legislative session and even after the legislative session ended. But one thing that I think we can really get better at is taking that large statewide story and regionalizing it to specific senators, to specific districts that have more political influence than others. And I think that's really the most impactful type of press, where you can take a story that is having a statewide impact, but regionalize it. And when you regionalize it, make sure that there's a real person and a real face behind that story. What NIDA has done really effectively is bring together data that shows where there are issues, but connecting that data to a real face and a real person is the next step that we need to take and do constantly. And we've done a little bit, and we've certainly done more of it recently, but I think that just needs to be a constant thing that we stress, that data, numbers, resources is good, but connecting it to a person that's really being impacted by those numbers is the next step. And I think, we're starting to get there more and more.
Senator, would you agree with that the most effective stories are personal stories? This ties into a question we also got through the chat about, and this is for Tommy and the senator. What PR elicits the most engagement? What moves you the most?
Yeah, no, I think Tom is exactly right, that there is a role, and you have to personalize it. You have to put a face on it. It has to be like a human interest story. It can't be about like just the numbers or the budget or the policy. It has to be, this is, and many times it sounds, it doesn't sound great, but it's these horrible stories. It's horrible stories. And I say, as a lawmaker, many times people don't seek me out and have a meeting with me when things are going great. You hear the horror stories, and it's important to listen closely and hear that, and then say, okay, how do we share this in a way that is respectful? How do we share your story so it gets through and it doesn't happen again? And I think what Tom's talking about is exactly right, that to do that effectively, to regionalize it is very important. That many times you'll see a story, where I am, it's the Journal News, it's the Daily. And it's harder than ever to get in that paper. The paper is getting smaller and smaller. It's one of the Gannett papers, right? So it's USA Today, they have a lot of their content that's coming from the AP or whatever. And then they'll have the local stuff, but it's smaller and smaller. But what you'll find there is if I would pitch them on, hey, I'm introducing this bill, or this is bad, this budget cut, it's like, okay, whatever. Okay, here is, Molly, who is a child and is getting this service and now it's cut and this is the problem. And they talk to the family and that you'll see those stories. That's extremely important. The other thing about PR in a way is showing off the things that you're doing. And I think a great strategy as well is to invite lawmakers to visit your facilities. So if it's a business that's owned and run and operated by the organization, to have the lawmaker come in and see it, and not like a whole production, but come by for a half an hour, 45 minutes, walk through and see what's going on, so they start to build awareness of what is going on in the district. And also gives opportunities for them to think about for funding and things like that in the future.
Great. Tom, you've got some a short presentation of some of the work that you've done for NIDA, correct?
Tom, you're not,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is this presenting okay for everybody?
yeah, it looks great.
Okay, cool. So as I mentioned before, what I think the type of PR that I think we did really well, especially at the beginning of the campaign, and this kind of tracks with what Barbara went through at the beginning of the campaign, but I'm going to kind of tell the story through an earned media lens, kind of how the advocacy shifted, what were the points of the advocacy that occurred, and how did we try to take the different angle or pivot points and turn it into earned media moments. So 10 months ago, what feels like 10 years ago, we were starting with 3 for 5. And we did a really effective job of getting statewide outlets to really focus in and hone in on our issue. A couple of daily news stories, stories in City and State and New York State of politics. And a lot of people don't know City and State or New York State of politics, but Senator Carlucci can tell you, and Evan can tell you, that people that kind of revolve around Albany read these outlets on a day-to-day basis, right? So we got a good combination of really good political stories, as well as statewide stories that a lot of people focus on as well. And then we started to regionalize the stories as well, as you'll see from the story in the Buffalo News that's highlighted in the top right corner. So this was our strategy. We wanted to start out with large statewide stories, essentially telling legislators in Albany and within the administration that this is a big issue, that the IDD sector really needs an increase in funding, not only this year, but for the next 5 years. And we did that effectively. But one thing we didn't do in a few of these statewide stories was actually put a face to this issue. But we were planning on doing that in the regional stories. And we just really never got to that point. When it got to March, we really had to start transitioning our advocacy from 3 for 5 to highlighting the issues that were happening within the sector when COVID-19 really started to get amplified. And that is where the campaign really shifted. So we started out by trying to tell the story in individual places, that individual providers were facing in different areas of the state. So obviously the issue was really happening in New York City at first. So that's where our focus was. So we got a story in New York One, the Queens Daily Eagle, another separate daily news opinion piece. And those media stories that happened at a lower level got the attention of the New York Times. And it ended up with a national story in the Times that really focused on what issues this sector was facing at this time period. But not only that, how DSPs and others were trying to deal with the increase in COVID-related cases that were happening within this sector. And I think there was a real difference between how the nursing home issue was covered and how our issue was covered. And I think it would actually positively portray the sector more than what's happening with nursing homes now and what happened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And that New York Times story really exploded. So we started out with a few regional stories within New York City, then the New York Times story hit, and we started to get stories throughout the state. And it really came to the point where we were getting 4 to 5 media requests a day. And that really started to explode. And I think we did a good job telling that story. One other thing that I want to highlight is, at first, the campaign that we were running for 3 for 5 had a social media amplification side to it as well. So as we were getting stories in the press, we were also telling that story via social media. And the metrics and data that we got back from the content that we were running was really, really impressive. Our goal was to target people that were likely to sympathize or engage with content about people that have IDD. And it worked. We were getting metrics that you rarely see in any campaign that we've run throughout in New York State. So for instance, on Facebook, we ran about 1 million impressions, and we got what is an 8.98% click-through rate. That means for every 100 people that saw our content, 10 people were actually engaging with it, liking it, retweeting it, reposting it, etc. And that is a pretty astonishing metric. What we're used to seeing is around a 1% click-through rate. So to see something that's 10 times the normal benchmark is pretty incredible. And what's interesting is that didn't track through to Instagram. So on Facebook, which is an older population platform, our metrics were amazing. On Instagram, which is a younger person's platform, our content wasn't as good. So it's just kind of a learning moment, something that we can take into our next campaign. And the last thing that I want to highlight here is, while we were running the social media campaign to individuals that are likely to empathize with people that have IDD, we were also running campaigns directly to legislators as well. And the legislative campaign actually performed really well too. So these are ads that Senator Carlucci is likely to see, administration is likely to see, people that work for the administration as well. So for those types of ads, we're not used to seeing as many clicks, because you're not likely to get someone like the senator to engage with this type of content right off the bat. So you're usually expecting to see 0.14% of people engage, but we were actually seeing 0.38% of people engage, which was a really strong performance for this type of audience. And then the last thing I just want to highlight here, sorry, this phone just keeps on ringing, is how much engagement the New York Times article actually got. So after this story ran, we noticed that 27.5 million people actually viewed it on Facebook. It was shared on Twitter over 3,700 times. And that just shows like the extraordinary amount of people that not only read the content, but also engaged with it. And right now we're really focusing on the impending cuts. So like the senator said, it's really good to regionalize our stories, make sure that the legislators that are within the districts that we're trying to target and educate about our issue are seeing that it's not just a statewide issue, it's an issue that affects people within your district. And that's what you're seeing here. We're trying to make sure that News 12 in Westchester, so the Westchester legislators are seeing it, legislators from Staten Island are seeing it, legislators from the lower Hudson Valley area are seeing it, and people from upstate New York with the Daily Star as well are seeing that this isn't just an issue that are affecting people in Albany, it's affecting people throughout the state. And each one of these stories mentions a real person that has a family member with IDD that is suffering from the impending cuts coming from the administration. So I think that kind of tells a full circle of, we started with 3 for 5, we transitioned to the COVID-19 pandemic communications, and now we're really trying to fight the impending cuts coming, the potential cuts coming from OPWDD. I'll pause there, see if anyone has questions.
We have a question. This is this goes along with PR. It's for the senator. Possibly Evan could speak to it as well. And it's something that I'll be talking about here in a little bit. But we have this one-click advocacy tool, and we'll be talking about how that, how we sort of dovetail with a PR strategy to use these tools. How effective are sort of, the letters, letter writing campaigns, phone banks, things like that, Senator?
I think it plays a piece in the puzzle. It's something you notice. Okay, you got 100, 1,000 emails, the phone's ringing, so you try to keep track of that. So definitely you start to pay attention to that. I would agree that it definitely plays a part. Especially if it's people you see on the list that are from your district, that's very helpful. So I would have to say, yeah, you pay attention when you start to get, hundreds, thousands of emails, even if they are templates. Many times you do get they'll use that type of strategy for a national campaign, and you'll get people from all over the country, all over the state. I feel it's most effective that if you're actually getting people within the district, then it's effective.
Gotcha.
That people, you want people to identify themselves. Many times there's campaigns like that where it's just, okay, this Bob, from Utica said something. If you can identify them, they say, hey, it's David Carlucci from New City, New York. That helps influence that even more.
And Tommy, could that then influence your PR strategy? So could the fact that you send 10,000 or 40,000 letters, could that then be a news hook?
Sometimes, it depends on the media moment, right? I would say if you get 10,000 petition signatures on an issue that's really hot in the press, you have an opportunity to try to highlight it, right? But if the issue isn't already within the press, getting 10,000 petition signatures, for instance, is probably not something that you're going to be able to introduce into the news cycle in a way that drives a story. It might be a mention in a bigger story, but it's not going to actually drive news. It's just going to be kind of a mention. But the great thing about social media is you're able to target people within a specific district and then ensure that the tool that they're driven back to directs their message to the senator that's actually from that district, right? So social media has become so targeted these days that you're literally able to speak to people that not only are likely to be supportive of your issue, but also live in the area of the senator that you need to influence or pressure to actually support your issue. And that's why social media is such a strong tool. And at the same time, you can be running different ads to the actual people that you're trying to influence on a specific decision that really tries to detail the issue to them. So you can be running two different pieces of content to two different people based on exactly what you want those people to see, which I think is just really interesting.
Thank you. Barbara, what do you think? This may dovetail nicely with
there was a question in the chat box though, that I just did want to ask, and actually particularly Senator Carlucci and Tommy. I know in working with the families, particularly the downstate families, they had a mobile rally on the anniversary of the date that Governor Mario Cuomo closed Willowbrook. And there was a real concern that particularly upstate, but I think also that a lot of younger people have no idea what Willowbrook was. And so the question is, one of the things that came out of some recent Lobby Day events is the fact that legislators are unaware of the Willowbrook State School scandal and subsequent lawsuit. How can we best educate our officials in this historical event so that there's an understanding of our past in order to better appreciate the IDD future service needs?
Yeah, I have been part of that conversation and agree completely that probably most lawmakers don't know what Willowbrook is and what it means for all of us. I think the first thing that can be done, and I'm thinking very, action items here, one thing that you should do going forward is each year do a commemorating resolution and have it read on the floor of the Senate, on the floor of the Assembly, and make a day out of that. Now, I know it's not when we're in session, but you can do a day and make it a day where you commemorate what happened at Willowbrook. And maybe you could even bring, survivors that were there up to Albany. That could be an effective day, because if you're on the floor, if I'm sitting on the floor and a resolution comes up, I have to hear it, it's there. So there are things I've learned a lot just hearing the resolutions over the years. I think that's an effective way to get to the lawmakers and make a whole day out of it. Maybe you have even in the well or on the way over, you have like a exhibition, an exhibit of what Willowbrook was and the legacy of it. And I think now more than ever, this is an important story to tell because of all the changes happening and how we have seemed to forget our history, that it can be very compelling. I think that's an easy way to start to educate lawmakers about this very important issue. And one thing I wanted to mention from Tom's slides, it's something that I found over the years that not on the New York Times level, but like on the local level, what I'm finding more is, for us, it's LOHUD in the Hudson Valley. And that's Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties read that, the Daily. And so what's happened is, as media is becoming, what's the word? The staffs are smaller. They're not doing as much investigative reporting. That a source like the New York Times, of course, but even something like the Journal News or LOHUD, you get a story in there, and then the other outlets will pick it up. Like a big one here is, the radio, 1010 or 880 AM in the New York City metro market, that I find that you get a story in the Journal News, the reporter will call you the next morning from the radio and be like, hey, I saw that, can you talk about it? Same with News 12, which probably, when you think about it, 1010 wins or 880 in New York City, News 12, nowadays, I would bet that they're getting more eyeballs than the paper is. And they're two different types of media. What I found is the paper, you might get some investigative reporting. When you talk to people, they're barely reading the articles anymore. You could be mentioned in an article and, people have not read through that. But on TV, they're like, okay, I kind of get it. I see the pictures, I get the story. Okay, it's happened. So it's just an interesting thing that we're going through. And then you have to couple that all with more and more people are getting their news from Facebook and Facebook groups, and how you combat that. And I've seen this from, 10 years worth of polling in my Senate races, where I would poll the question, where do you get your media? Where do you get your news? I'm sorry. And you would see at one time it was in this area, it was the Journal News was dominant, and that has slowly declined. And more where I remember 10 years ago, I'd be like, what? People are getting their news from Facebook? And it would be a small number. And now it's probably the majority. And how all of the things that we're talking about in a way are, you have a system in place, right? You talk to a journalist, they write a story, maybe, you pitch them on it, and then it spreads to other outlets. With Facebook and all the new social media, the strategy has to be completely different. So it's just an interesting change that we're going through. The print media, the TV, the radio, that's still very potent, but there's now this whole other force of, I would call it maybe untraditional media that you do have to recognize and be a part of.
I would agree with everything the senator just said. And I would almost say, when you place a story in the traditional media, if that's what we still want to call it, it's really more for the legislator than it is for the people, right? Because that's what they will still pay attention to it, because not every legislator is so educated about how people read their news, and they're still really worried about when their local paper prints something. But when you're trying to educate the public about a specific issue, social media is really the place to do that. And what I went through before is interesting, right? Facebook, you're getting tremendous engagement. Instagram, you weren't getting tremendous engagement. So why is that? It's because older people that maybe experience Willowbrook, maybe know about some of the tragedies that have happened within the IDD sector, are more willing to engage with this content. But what's scary is the younger audience isn't. So that means there's an education gap with your younger audience where they're less likely to engage with content about your most critical issues. So there's an education gap that needs to be resolved. So as they grow older, they become more educated about issues within this sector, and they are willing to advocate for it. Now that's a long-term path, but it's something definitely to focus on in the future. And the one other thing I would say is people still do read their local newspaper. They're actually less likely to read the New York Times than they are their local newspaper, which they'll read a little bit more. So that local press is important. They're still not reading it as much as they read Facebook, but a little bit more than some of the national papers. So that strategy of those statewide papers and those LCA reporters, the reporters that cover the governor, are more for people like the senator than it is for kind of the local audience or kind of the general public.
Bill, should we ask one more question?
Yeah, why don't we ask a question about strategies, and then I'll talk about measurable objectives as it pertains to strategies, and we'll toss that around a little bit. What strategies, I would think that this would be for Tommy and Evan, what strategies should we pursue to tie in advocacy efforts both on a state and federal level, given how the lack of federal Medicaid dollars impacts the state?
So I think it's a great question. And I think where it gets interesting. So I know a lot of the different provider associations and family advocacy groups and self-advocates, they have great relationships with their congressional members. The piece where it gets difficult, and I think where it's challenging, is making sure that the federal members are aware on how what they pass at the federal level, how it trickles down and impacts providers at the state level. Because I think oftentimes what we found is that there's a presumption that language that's enacted at the federal level will either positively impact or not necessarily do what I think they think that it will impact, and there's a fine nuance between it. So I think it's continuing to educate, continuing to have conversations. One of the things we've been doing through NIDA is we've been having regular conversations with Anchor, which is one of the federal advocacy groups, and making sure that we're kind of working in lockstep on issues that impact both the state and federal level, so that we're on the same page. And we've been working very closely with Senator Gillibrand's office, a number of the congressional members who have been very helpful in working to try and make changes to federal legislation as it's starting to, as it's being negotiated and when things start to come up. So there's definitely, the benefits of trying to coordinate the larger groups, but also, making sure that there is a strong federal voice and making sure that Anchor, which is the federal group, is aware of the unique issues that we're facing in New York as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is come to the table with a solution. We do a lot of advocacy where we're saying we are concerned about this and we're concerned about that. We need more funding, et cetera. I think also having the solution in mind when you come to the table is really important, and something that we should start implementing into our press strategy as well. So we're not looked at as an organization or a group that's constantly just complaining, but coming to the table with a solution. And I think Evan can speak to this. The senator can speak to this. A lot of people are concerned and upset about their sector or their industry. And a lot of people are talking about that concern, but not everyone is coming with that concern, but also saying, but we have a way to fix it. So really thinking through the strategy to actually get that fix that, all stakeholders will be okay with, I think is something to focus on as well, specifically with our press strategy too.
Great.
All right. So we'll talk a little bit about what goes hand in hand, I think, when you have a successful advocacy campaign with your press strategy. And that is the ask and the measurable objectives that we assign to that ask. Let me just share my screen here. Oh, of course, it starts at the beginning. All right. So we have any football fans in the audience? No? Tonight, the Falcons are going to take on the Panthers. Everybody knows the Panthers are going to trounce the Falcons. You can disagree with me in the comment section, but you'll be wrong. But the thing that we're looking at is at the end of the night, people are just going to check the score, right? Just to see who wins. They don't like, put the effort in the Chiron. But if the score is the only thing that matters, then why don't we play football on this field? Right? It seems silly. If there's a lot of work that goes on in between the goalposts and a lot of successes and failures and learning opportunities. And the same goes for long-term advocacy. Pass fail isn't a good metric for long-term advocacy. And whether you get exactly what you ask for isn't a realistic assessment of whether your advocacy was successful. You want to be able to show your successes. You want to be able to improve on them. There are too many variables outside of our control, and we may not find ourselves in a position where we have to pivot our ask anyway. We've had to do that all year. We've done nothing but pivot. We wouldn't consider 3, 4, 5 a failure. I mean, you take a look at all the press it generated that Tommy went through. You wouldn't consider that a failure because COVID came along and basically ended the world. But what you can do in order to measure your short-term successes is create benchmarks for the advocacy tactics that you're using and the objectives that you want to reach when you're using them. So, we asked about letter writing campaigns earlier. CP State has an online advocacy tool that we use quite often. We think it's pretty valuable. Or, you talk about motivating people to get to a mobile rally, or you talk about press hits or impressions or reach. You can assign measurable objectives that can inform and improve how you advocate in the future. So what you have to do is you have to define a goal. I think we talked about that a lot during this panel, is to go in with the ask, with a solution, but also not just the goal of your advocacy, but also the goal of your advocates. What do you want them to do? Informing people isn't enough. You want them to do something. You want them to write a letter, attend a rally, click on that social post, some sort of conversion. It's got to be quantifiable and actionable. So just to give an example, if I say that my goal is to get 10,000 letters sent, I can monitor that progress, allocate CP's resources, and adjust those resources, all right, to meet that goal. But if I don't have a measurable objective, I can sink a lot of time and effort into something without knowing how I affected it. Now, conversely, I can also determine if I underestimated my objective. If we sent 10,000 letters with no trouble at all, that's great. We didn't even, we adjust. If we sent 10,000 letters and it had absolutely no impact, if we didn't even get a form letter in reply, we can adjust that too. But you got to be able to measure it. So you develop a call to action and conversion rate. And I think this is where Tommy and Kivit come in. This is where coordination with PR strategy is key. Content and content placement is really important and valuable. I mean, you see how many people saw that New York Times story and what that led to. But you also need to be able to determine how it's affecting your conversion. So if your goal is to, have a successful letter writing campaign, is your PR strategy, in support of that? So sticking with that example, the PR strategy may have a call to action, write those letters and save our services. And now just to pull the curtain back a little bit, our social posts, we, sticking with the letter writing campaign, let's say we put up a social media post with a call to action and it reaches a little bit over 2,400 people. And of those, 107 click through to our advocacy tool. and actually send a letter. So our click-through rate or conversion rate is just over 4%. Now you heard Tommy say earlier, industry-wide, your click-through rate is less than 1%, but it can be tough to say that you only have a conversion rate of 4%. It can sound a little defeating, but to be honest with you, Facebook's click-through rate is only around 1% because of things like retail, healthcare, education, like the realms we work in, they all have lower click-through rates than 1%. Getting people to do anything is difficult. All right. We talked a little bit about, the shrinking newsrooms and what people's readership are. Did a little research and spent quite a few years in newsrooms. The average news consumer spends 2 minutes on a newspaper's entire website. Only a third of online article readers will scroll down to the bottom of the page. They'd rather they'd rather click away from the page and scroll down. The nonprofit industry average open rate for e-newsletters, so you're sending pertinent information to the people that need it most, the open rate is 18%. It's less than 1 out of 5 people who are actually invested in your issue are opening your e-newsletter. Now CP States has doubled that, so take that. So when we measure these things, we can actually see how it's affecting our advocacy. We can see, okay, that because of that social media post, we sent 11,500 letters today. We can see that 80% of our senders were people who had never used our advocacy tool before. All right. And then we can take a look at what's working, what's not working, and adjust. All right. I think we tend to shy away, and please, feel free to jump in, but I think sometimes organizations tend to shy away from assessing these short-term objective goals because sometimes the numbers aren't great. 4% isn't great, even though it's 4 times, as the click-through average, as Tommy said. And we tend to stress about getting like less than 100% engagement. Nothing gets 100% engagement, So we tend to use tactics that aren't measurable, or we don't measure those that can be, because sometimes the numbers aren't great. But if you don't assess your progress, you can't adjust. And if you don't define the success at the outset, you can't claim it. And if you can't identify what will make you more successful in the future, you have a hard time. And at the end of the day, that can lead to a waste of resources when that's exactly what we're advocating for. So I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that. I'd like to hear any comments, any questions.
I just want to agree. I mean, it's in a place like Albany where people fight for years for a piece of legislation. It's so important to have shorter term measurable effects be measured. So you see if a campaign is truly being effective by something different than whether a piece of legislation passed or not.
I am all about the metrics, Tommy. I really am. It's you have to be able to measure. I mean, I feel first of all, I have a sizable gut, but I feel like I have pretty good gut instinct. But if you or I feel a certain way about a PR strategy or a tactic, if it's not supported by data, then we have nothing to fall back on. We can't measure and adjust. So we talked a little bit about, Barbara, did you want to go to some more questions in the?
Yeah, there are a few more questions that have come up. One is, and I guess this is for probably all the panelists, but should organizations that are pursuing legal action to reverse the funding cuts use different advocacy strategies to educate stakeholders and legislators?
That's a great question. I think it's a yes and no. And I think one of the things that's going to be important to do when, with regards to the litigation that's working through the process currently is to educate individuals, whether it's staff in the Senate and the Assembly. We've done, a round of meetings and conversations with folks in the governor's office, and, and they're aware. But it's also educating, Assembly and Senate members as well, so that they know what's going on and why. Because I think, part of the story to be able to be told with this, and one of the things that NIDA has right now that we haven't released yet, we're waiting until after the election to put out, is an updated survey related to the October 1st cuts, which tells a pretty strong story as to why this is not the way to be going. When you take that and then you build that in the narrative that's created by the litigation, it helps, I think, paint a full picture as to why these issues are such a concern for providers. But it also paints a message and really broadcasts enough is enough. As providers of individuals with developmental disabilities, we can't sit back and allow these cuts, which are going to be very devastating to the individuals and to the providers to care for those individuals, to allow those to move forward. We tried working with Division of Budget and with OPWDD in the governor's office when the cuts were first announced to try and reverse it. We came up with an alternative spending model, which would have achieved the same dollar of savings, which was shot down by OPWDD and DOB. And it really became clear that the cuts weren't actually to effectuate a fiscal savings target. They were to be put into place to shift policy. And I think that's really why now the narrative that we're going to create following, once the lawsuit's actually filed, coupled with the report that's been done and the survey data that we've collected, and then it will really paint a strong message to get across to key stakeholders.
May I add too that educating and persuading, I mean, it sounds in the weeds, but educating and persuading are two different things and require different language, different, strategies. And one thing I learned in school PR is that don't try to educate when you need to persuade quickly. So the senators talked about those sort of off-session meetings and meetings throughout the year. And those are great times, I think, to educate. When you need to persuade and you still need to educate, then you've almost got double the lift, so you really need to lay that groundwork, basically all the time.
Good point. Goes back to what Senator Carlucci said to begin with. So one more question, and this is from a parent. And basically the question is, how do we engage individuals and families in the advocacy process? It's been challenging throughout the years, even more so these days. And I do know, go ahead, Senator.
Oh, please. Well, what were we going to say?
No, I do. It has been a concern, and I know that NIDA is looking to do more of that. CP of New York State, we're actually having a meeting on Monday on how we engage with families across the state. And we've been working with some of the statewide family groups and the regional family groups, but sort of collectively in a more macro way of actually reaching parents and families is a concern.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most critical thing that you could do as a lawmaker and heading the committee. It was a great deal of frustration for me, knowing that we have such an enormous potential in all of the families that are impacted, and that they're not participating really in the process. So my advice is that you have a process in place. You almost have a script and a roadmap for these individuals, and then you ask them to do it. You have to put that ask out, just like you're asking lawmakers to support a bill. You've got to ask your families and your members to do A, B, and C, and lay it out for them and say, this is what we really need you to do. We need you to make a meeting and go and see your lawmaker and stay on it and continue to do that, and almost have like captains in each of these legislative districts that are going to lead that brigade. And it'll take training. You're going to have to train these families, these individuals on how to do that and do it effectively. Because many people, they don't have a manual on how to do this. And they're just going and talking about their experiences. And that's good, but it has to be refined, and it has to be strategic, and it has to be like Bill had said, you have to be laying that groundwork all the time. I think it was a good analogy to say educating and persuading. And if you have to do it all at once, that's a heavy lift. I like to equate it to like the farming analogy, right? You can't just go and plant the seed and say, grow, grow. You have to spend some time. You have to plant the seed. You got to water it. And then you got to wait for it to grow and ripe. And then you have to harvest it. And the same is true with an advocacy campaign, that you have to plant the seed. You have to get the soil ready. You got to water it and nurture it. And then you can harvest it. You can't just go in and expect to harvest when you haven't planted and you haven't, tended to the crop. And I think you could use that analogy in this. And that's why I think in everything that we've talked about, that it's all important and it's all good. What I have seen as the most effective in delivering results is having that centered advocacy, that person-centered advocacy. That is the most potent and strongest type of advocacy you can see. So I think you almost need like a training manual for individuals, and you need to push that. Like this, if you want to help, this is what we need you to do. You don't need to go on a bus to Albany. You don't need to write a check. You need to go and meet with your lawmaker. You go and meet with your lawmaker. You are entitled to that. This person works for you. And remember, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And, my colleagues probably won't like me saying that, but it's the truth. We have these conversations like, when are you annoying? Well, who knows? That's different for everyone. But if you don't say anything and they don't know who you are, then you don't get anything. So you're better off being the annoying person than the nobody, right?
I just want to put a little sharper point on that. So the squeaky wheel definitely gets the oil, but I think it also has to be a well-pointed squeaky wheel so that we know the direction that we're headed in the ask. Because having been on the other side of having been on the other side of advocacy, I think one of the worst things is when you have a squeaky wheel and you want to try and help, but you don't know what the ask is. It becomes very challenging, and everybody ends up frustrated in the process. And a lot of times that frustration, it carries over. It's not just frustration, just that given month. It's something that happens, it gets stuck there for a while. So I think, one of the things we have been doing through NIDA is having weekly calls with a number of the statewide family advocacy groups, and really trying to be more coordinated and collaborating with those individuals to make sure that in those groups to make sure that we are headed in the same direction and that we're asking for the same thing, and that the issues that we might disagree on, we can disagree on and we can advocate for different things. But on the issues that we're in alignment on, we're all moving in the same direction to make and have a unified voice on that.
I like the idea that was mentioned earlier, and I was talking with some people about this as well, about the scorecard idea, because it's true that some of these issues, like the environmental scorecards that are put out, that it becomes a tool that, like in a debate that I recently had in my run for Congress, people were bringing up these scorecards from years ago that I really had paid little attention to at the time, but had become, no one even knows what the issues were, but it was like, your score was this. And it's like, well, okay. But as time progresses and people know, hey, these are going to come up in campaigns, that the lawmakers will pay more attention to it and say, oh, wait, I got a 90. Why didn't I get 100? And then they'll learn, okay, well, these are the things that are important. And we're going to be putting this scorecard out every year and assigning points to, bills and things like that. It could be a helpful tool.
And one of the things, just to dovetail on that, and I think that because there are going to be so many new faces in the legislature on both sides of the aisle, and you have a lot of younger members that are, much more radical in their views, it's really important to kind of educate those members and target those members to get them to start to care and listen and care about those issues, because it is something that they're new to, and they might not necessarily have the experience in their personal life or in their professional life with this sector. So a scorecard also gives them an ability to be part of the process and care a little bit more about those issues, because those are things that Tom and Kivit are able to blast across social media that gets traction on, Twitter or Facebook, and people care about that because they want to know, why did I get a 60? Why did I get an 80? And really try to have those members be engaged on those issues and really be focused on those issues that matter most.
And to continue on that, it holds us all accountable. And I'm not just talking about the lawmaker, it holds the organization accountable. Because one of the things too, as a lawmaker, that is hard to decipher is that you're always, there's a lot of asks, right? And you have to try to figure out, okay, what is really important and what's not? And how important is this? And are you willing to put something out that says, hey, the lawmakers that didn't go with us on this, we're going to give them a 0 or something like that. So it's not easy to do necessarily. And many organizations don't want to put lawmakers in that spot or be held accountable as well. That, it's easy to just float through and just, meander down the road and not really take hard positions as an organization as well. So I think that's something that by defining that and knowing, hey, these are the things that are important to us. This is how we can hold lawmakers accountable and ourselves accountable. I think that's a key point.
And I think that's an important part. Just, we have to be truthful with the scorecards. And if a member that we might like, and for all intents and purposes are helpful, but they're not actually standing up for the issues, maybe they do get a 60. And maybe then it forces them to be more engaged on some of the issues. But it's tough because I think, especially for this sector, everybody's been very, oh, thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for doing this. But, we need to develop more champions that have a broader approach, because again, in conferences for both majorities, when they're doing the budget and legislative priorities, you have to have the squeaky wheel saying we need to do something for the IDD sector. And that's one of the ways that we can get to that point.
And one other thing I was thinking about is how do you marry the challenges that you have, the issues that you've been fighting for, with some of the issues of our day, right? The things that are being talked about in the media and on social media and wherever. And one of the big things is social justice, and how your organization has been promoting social justice for decades. And yet it's not kind of seen in that lens. But how do you marry the two? That you're talking about, a real living wage for direct service providers, professionals. That this is an important issue, and one that is really in line with the topics that many of the new lawmakers that will be coming into in January care about and want to fight for, and might not be thinking about the IDD providers in that lens. And how do you kind of, you match those up and make it understandable to many of these lawmakers that care deeply about these issues, but might not see it in the same lens, that you're not only just, helping this cause, but you're also having this whole economic impact as well. And the justice behind having direct DSPs be actual professionals and have a career. The things we've been talking about for years, how do you kind of, have a bridge from this issue to the other issue and kind of connect them.
And actually, the last point you just made actually goes back to the start of the pandemic, and one of the things that I think most frustrated with and kind of sick to my stomach about, the fact that we had to go to the governor's office to argue and advocate that DSPs were essential healthcare workers and had to fall under that category. And we were rushing quickly because when that guidance came out, I think there was the assumption that it was, and then when when there was clear that didn't necessarily include DSPs, it was something that it was just kind of, how did this get missed? And that's something that it was a real concern that we really worked quickly to get them included. But it's really something that needs to be again, pushed and made recognized across all legislators, everybody in the governor's office, professional staff, and so that there's a clear understanding of that.
Great. Thank you so much. It is 11:59, and so I know, Evan, that you need to leave, and thank you so much. We are just going to go over a few things more on some other advocacy efforts and other ways of that CP of New York State provides advocacy for people with disabilities, families, and our affiliates across the state. So you are more than welcome to stay, but I do understand that if you have to leave, we will just wrap up, try and do it pretty quickly. And again, as Evan just said, he was very successful in getting us, our DSPs, included as essential workers, and all of everyone who across the state who works with people with developmental disabilities. And again, that is a kind of, there's lots of advocacy that goes on. That's not about just getting the, the money or more money or a bag of cash, as Bill would say. So, and again, we've worked closely with OPWDD and the DOH, the governor's office, to advocate for disability issues. We have multiple calls with our committees, with the governor's office, with OPWDD. We've started issuing, Bill issues his nightly communications on what's going on and all the things of interest, the CP State News. And I can't believe only 35% of people open it up, because it's every night that Bill puts that out. There's really critical information. Because again, we try not to overwhelm people with a million emails and aggregate all of that in the CP News every evening. We've shared best practices on COVID across affiliate committees, residential, day services, education. And again, these committees have been integral in helping each other wade through all of the ever-changing rules, regulations, and mandates coming down from the governor's office on opening, reopening, closing, and all of those things going on. We work closely with OPWDD to ensure financial and regulatory relief, including retainer biller, reduced hours, the day hab, 1 hour, and we continue to work on those things. We established a provider call with SED on a bi-weekly basis, which was based on what OPWDD was doing at the time, and it helps provide education providers across New York State meet with SED on a very regular basis to discuss concerns and questions about what is going on the education side for children with disabilities. So in June, we implemented the one-click advocacy tool through Voter Voice, and we've launched 7 advocacy campaigns. And as Senator Carlucci had said, that targets just your legislators. So it doesn't send it to other legislators, other senators, state senators, assembly members, House members. It goes to only those representatives for each constituent. So the letters will come from constituents. We partner with NIDA and sent more than 30,000 messages to OPWDD, the governor, and local legislators during this public comment period on the vacancy rate cuts. And our current campaign, Stop the Cuts, has resulted in nearly 16,000 messages to date. And as Bill had said earlier, 80% of senders are new advocates. In addition, we've been working with the family groups, the statewide family group, and then some regional family groups. We have partnered with them and on they are using our one-click advocacy tool for a family Save Our Services campaign. We've worked with them on a mobile rally that they had that I mentioned a little earlier, that crossed the Mario Cuomo Bridge and went to Willowbrook and had speakers. And again, it's a mobile rally with chalk on cars, talking about Save Our Services, no more cuts. Please don't send us back to Willowbrook. And there was a Capital Region rally as well, mobile rally. So we have weekly briefings for affiliates every Monday morning at 11 o'clock with our partners from DWANI, IAC, the Alliance of Long Island Agencies, and the New York Association of Emerging and Multicultural Providers. We have a weekly briefing for all of our members. And we have weekly committee calls. We provided testimony. We advocate, as Evan had said. Evan has been critical in helping and coordinating with Anchor, which is a national organization, and then some other national organizations in order to advance issues. And again, CP of New York State has been key in all of the NIDA, coordinating all of the 7 disability associations across New York State to speak with one voice. And Bill has worked on the data, the survey, which has gotten, again, a lot of media attention and both in New York State as well as nationally. Bill, were you gonna?
Yep, thanks, Barbara. I know that we're running over and I'm pushing up against lunch, so I will make this quick. So one of the other things that we did that you know, there was cash involved, but it wasn't just doling out funds, is Cindy Morris in our office has been instrumental in securing PPE for affiliates and other agencies. More than 340,000 pieces have been issued. Pieces of safety equipment have issued to agencies. You can see hundreds of thousands of KN95 face masks, face shields, gowns. Basically, you know, our affiliates had a need. We were able to provide that for them. Cindy has been amazing in doing that. As Barbara mentioned, pardon me. As Barbara mentioned, you know, we are very involved with New York Disability Advocates. If you get the email from me every week asking you to fill out that survey, and you do, thank you. If you don't, why not? But we, you know, we gather data every week. We partner with Scott Landis at Syracuse University's Learner School. He was on a panel yesterday. From an advocacy standpoint, that data has been referenced. It was referenced in the New York Times article, actually, back in April, when we had really only gathered a couple weeks of it. But, you know, it was most recently, I believe, in the Harvard Review. It's been in academic journals nationwide. So, you know, and also from a practical standpoint, it's really shaping the conversation. You know, we have data that shows that the IDD population is 4 times more likely to have a fatal outcome you know, when they contract COVID. So I mean, that's just really important work that we've done. Data. All right. So another thing that CP offers that I don't know if a lot of people do, if you're not using it, is our online learning platform, Litmos. We started about 5 years ago. It predates me by 4 years, you know. So when we've recently doubled our user group, and we've added 4 COVID-19 specific courses, and we partnered with Pro Knowledge to do that. So that's very valuable to affiliates. Barbara, if you want to talk about the Station MD grant, the telehealth grant, I would appreciate that.
Let me unmute. There was actually a session yesterday, a conference session with Station MD. CP applied for a health department grant 4 years ago, I think now, to provide telemedicine in residences so that individuals do not have to go to emergency rooms. And it was shown by actually a Staten Island CP Unlimited study that using Station MD at the time from a PPS grant, that it prevented 80 to 90% of individuals going from a residence into an emergency room. And usually when they go to an emergency room, because the emergency room staff is not used to dealing with people with developmental disabilities, maybe not verbal, complex needs, they often end up doing very expensive tests and then often admit individuals to the hospital. So we had applied for this health department grant. It actually started getting up and running in January, February. And it has been an absolute blessing and literally a lifesaver during COVID-19. It's a 5-year, $13 million grant, and 48 agencies, including 16 CP affiliates, are part of the grant. There are over 1,000 sites and 7,000 individuals are included in the grant. And since March, Station MD has handled over 4,800 telemedicine calls. So literally that's 4,800 people who probably otherwise would have gone into the emergency room. And it's a much better quality of care, and it prevents, again, particularly during COVID, when people really can't go to emergency rooms. It's really been an incredible thing, and it's statewide. And again, it's just one of the other things that CP has done to advocate for all individuals with disabilities and families in other ways that are not just the bag of money.
Right, but Barbara, $13 million is a pretty big bag of money.
Right.
So that's.
But all of that money goes to the kiosks and the Station MD contracts and everything else. So yes, it's a lot of people that are helped.
Right. So another thing that we've done for affiliates and other agencies this year, and again, this comes back to Cindy Morris in our office, is these are the CHOP grants through the Cabrini Foundation, the Community Health Outreach Project grants. And these are smaller grants, small awards, a lot of them under $1,000 for walkers, hearing aids, dental services, eye care, basically everyday things that really make a difference in these people's lives. And it's just one of the ways that we help affiliates. We've gotten great feedback on this. Also, I do want to note that we did use we did have a larger award for the CHOP grant to secure PPE. So that was part of that PPE process as well. But these are just really great everyday things that affect people's lives so positively. And we've awarded more than $500,000 to date. And that's been dispersed to almost 620 people. We've gotten great feedback on that. I won't read them. We're all very hungry, but really we just wanted to sort of encapsulate some of, I think, the lesser known ways that CP State advocates for its affiliates. It's not always, 3 for 5. It's not just, opposing the cuts. These are small ways that, and sometimes not so small ways, that CP State helps out affiliates. And Barbara, if you want to go over what we have, what's on deck.
So again, we had talked about, in answer to one of the questions, we're looking to collaborate more and develop relationships statewide with families. The CP New York State Board is looking to expand its representation through across the state. We're assessing staffing and contact track skills needed to support changes. There are so many changes going on in all of the affiliates with all of the programs, education, OPWDD, OMH. There's just health department programs. There's so many changes, not only because of COVID, but because of the funding issues. We're continuing to work with all of our affiliates and increase collaboration with other provider groups and families and other associations in order to promote affiliate priorities.
You know, we took a lot of questions during the session itself, but I would say that, you know, we're about 15 minutes over. This is your last chance to ask a question. All right, hearing none. And we're all of our contact information is in the session information online. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us after this session. We really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes. And on behalf, oh, did you want to say something?
No, just thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Great.
I was just going to thank you. On behalf of all our affiliates, I want to really thank all our panelists, Senator Carlucci, Tom Mira, and Evan, for your participation and wealth of information and insight. We really, this was I think a really great panel, and we really appreciate not only all that you've done today and your participation, but all that you do for people with disabilities and their families across New York State every day. We also want to again thank the Beacon Group and Focus Wealth Management for their support of New York State, CP of New York State, and then in particular the conference in this session. So thank you very much.
Having us.
Thanks, everybody.